Initial assessments work against the standard of practice. The standard of practice is described at all.net, the website all.net. You click on protection and this comes up. This is a diagram. It's a clickable diagram. Anything you click on the bottom part of the screen will show up. It's a brief description of what this particular element is. The standard of practice approach starts with how the business works, understands issues of oversight that turns business needs into duties to protect, then deals with risk management that turns duties to protect into what to protect and how well, addresses security management, which uses power and influence to control the protection program, and this includes organizational governance, business processes, human beings as actuators and sensors, and then the various management processes involved, which typically include the management policy standards, procedures, documentation, auditing, testing, technology, personnel, incidents, and so forth. Next, it addresses what's the control architecture. This is something that many people in the protection arena don't take into account very well. It starts with protection objectives: integrity, availability, confidentiality, use, control, accountability, transparency, and custody are the ones that we're using. It also addresses your control scheme, your functional units, how your perimeter mechanisms work, the basis of trust, access facilitation. That's how you make sure things get done, as well as, that's part of the protection function, assuring availability and utility. And then the change control process. Once you understand those things, you can then build technical security architecture, which includes inventory and workflows. It also addresses life cycles of business, people, systems, and data, contextual issues of time, location, purpose, behavior, identity, and method. It has the process, which includes deter, prevent, detect, react, and adapt, data state, which is protection of data at rest, in use, and in motion. And then deals with protective mechanisms, perception, behavior, structure, and content that are in contact with the content and assure its business utility. The next step in the process, once you understand what it's about, is to get a statement of work. So we have a standard proposal and statement of work. It includes options for industrial control systems, as well as options for insurance. It describes, what we do and how we do it, details the particulars of the information involved. This is the insurance option in red. Terms and conditions, typical cost estimates, and so forth. Once you sign off on the statement of work, the next step is a SPOC document. That's a document for the single point of contact. So the studies that we do involve a single point of contact. They're notified of their various responsibilities, what they have to get done, how to do that, how to protect information and content in transit, how to deliver drafts, how to use the technology that supports all this, who knows what and when to say yes and no, drafts, insurance-related recommendation handling, and so forth. It ends with a checklist, and the checklist provides the means by which the single point of contact can verify that everything's being done in a timely fashion and track the process. The process involves a one-day online interactive session with the client. So this particular process that applies that, the one-day session uses GoToMeeting, which is an online communications tool that we're using right now for this recording. One day online with a group of usually 3 to 6 key members of the team on the client side. We have 2 folks on our side in these processes. It starts out with the day-long teleconference where we gather the as-is information on the current state of your information protection program. This is all done on the screen. We'll show you the tool in a minute. So you see exactly what we're typing in as we type it in. There are no surprises. You get to change it to reflect the reality of your current situation if we don't accurately reflect it. At that point, we go back and we do, we have a second seat that sits on the assessment. There's a peer review process internally. We produce internal initial draft documents. We do various evaluations against the standard of practice, and we produce ultimately report documents. You get that report within 10 days. And then if you're exercising the insurance option, there's ongoing support. The information is strictly confidential. We ask that you don't provide personally identifying information or any other information not specifically related to the protection program, and we won't accept it if you try to give it to us. The one exception is we do require that you tell us who is on the other side of the line. It's all for limited use. This is not something to be used, sort of arbitrarily. It's reflective of what the folks on the phone said on that day, and an opinion based on the standard of practice and the experts who apply it. Standard of practice, by the way, is not a standard. It's not something you follow. Rather, it identifies a set of reasonable and prudent practices that may be reasonable and prudent for the future state of the enterprise we talk to. These are not the only such practices. So just because we identify that this is a reasonable and prudent future state doesn't mean either that your current state is not reasonable and prudent, or that there aren't other future states that might be reasonable and prudent as well. It only indicates that we've identified these futures as reasonable and prudent for your enterprise in this context. We use experts to do this. The experts, no matter how much they know, are not perfect. They don't know everything and they can't remember everything. And that's true in almost any field. So they use the tool to ask a reasonably comprehensive set of questions, codify the results using a consistent language, identify variances from baselines for consideration, and produce information relative to your protection posture. The experts vary the assessments based on the reality on the ground. So if you tell them that something is different than what we see in other places, then they'll adapt for that. In addition, if you have a very unique situation, they may find it reasonable and prudent as a future state. They may say you shouldn't change any of those things. But if it's something that's just for you, that's where it'll end. If it's something that applies to other enterprises, then we adapt the standard of practice. And to get a sense of this, the standard of practice has well over 100 elements in it. So, if you changed everything in the standard of practice, every several years, by just reviewing it all every several years, that would mean several changes per month. And we have several changes per month to the standard of practice. We continue to develop it over time to reflect changes in the world and changes in the science and art and engineering associated with information protection. So it's a changing objective. We're just taking a snapshot of it as we sit here today. We use a variety of tools. GoToMeeting is the tool we use for having the meetings. We have a tool that's custom developed called JDM, and that applies the standard of practice content. The content is open source. As I identified earlier, you can go to all.net and look it up, and I'll show you how to do that at the end. And we also have internal metrics that keep us on track for the day. The day has a schedule with a series of breaks and review of the introductory material, and at the end of the day, we deliver the as-is initial draft for your review. So there's no delay. The meeting comes to an end, and before we hang up the phone, we deliver the as-is report to you, so you can review that. Typically, you get about a day to review it, but there are almost never any changes. And the changes we tend to get are, for example, the name of an internal system which was misspelled or something like that. Almost nothing of substance. After that, we respond to you. Time is of the essence. You get your final report in 10 days. And then if you're exercising the ongoing support or insurance options, then there's an ongoing process. We'll discuss that briefly. And then we take any discussions and questions, and now we go collecting the data. Just as an aside here, there's no gap analysis done. It's a cooperative effort to help you understand your issues. We don't have findings like an audit. This is not an audit. This is something to help you move forward. And in the case of an insurance assessment, to help the insurer make determinations about insurability, retentions, and rates. It's about gathering facts. It's not about, forming opinions about things. It's friendly, factual, and direct. So the next thing we do is we use our tool, JDM. So I'm going to bring up JDM here. And this is an example. This is an industrial control systems example of logical perimeters. As you can see, industrial control systems have things like HMIs, SCADAs, PLCs, sensors and actuators, history servers, and so forth, that are different from the sort of more common enterprise networking mechanisms, and there are particular elements that are required for that are different from what's required in other sorts of structures. So the way the tool works, we typically make a copy of the relevant overall structures, and we identify what you have. So for example, if you have vendors for patching, intrusion detection, and filters, antivirus and such, then we'll remove the other elements. If you have something else that you do that we hadn't anticipated, for example, a vendor for, I don't know what it might be, but we'll call it NPATS. We'll just make something up. You have a vendor for NPAS, we put that in there. So we modify the diagram to meet the particulars of your situation. And that's what you see on the screen, and that's what you will get in report at the end of the day. And we cover a wide variety of areas, obviously, overarching, business modeling, oversight, risk management, and so forth. So there's a wide range of issues that are covered, and we identify the current state. We also use this tool to identify reasonable and prudent future states. At the end of the day, you get a draft report, and this is an example of an as-is draft report produced at the end of the day. This is, in fact, this is for a particular industrial control facility, but we have very similar reports for the other elements of the standard of practice. This is what you get in an email right at the end of the day. You have time to peer review it, and after you do your review, we develop that reasonable and prudent future state and produce reports. And these are examples of reports of what they look like. This one's an industrial control systems report. There's almost always, some details in an executive summary that talk about the key issues that an executive would want to know about. We walk through the present situation. Same information you saw before, formatted to look a little bit better. You see the same information that you saw in the tool. And then there's a future state that we identify. So, for example, in this case, we said that the enterprise should combine IEC 61508 with the 3-level system, with levels 2 and 3 associated with medium risks. So instead of using the 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 that you see here in the diagram, we identified that 2 and 3 should be combined into medium risk, and then a 3-level process be used to identify and evaluate risk and make decisions. And so you can see it's a rather extensive and substantial report. In this case, it's 43 pages. We'll just take you to another example. This is it's for an investment company. Again, you may note that we have a logo up here. We generally work through third parties. So we have channel partners for the vast majority of the assessments we perform. And so we, in many cases, relabel under their label. But we enforce separation of duties. So we specify and verify protection, but we don't execute on the changes. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. In any case, this is what a report looks like, the as-is, the future state. You get a sense of the information that you get. And of course, the standard of practice is open and available, so you can look at that. If you're doing an insurance assessment, there are some additional reports generated. One of them is metrics. They involve absolute and relative metrics. The absolute are essentially rote application of the standard of practice, and the relative metrics are the judgment of the individuals performing the assessment through their peer review process. There's a roll-up at the bottom that identifies the overall status relative to that is comparing the as-is to the reasonable prudent future state. You can see, for example, in this case, zoning, that is separation of different areas of the network and so forth, just didn't apply. This particular organization had a different structure than many other organizations. And so that didn't apply. On the other hand, they tended to be weaker in business modeling, oversight, and risk management. That is to say, there were many more things that they might reasonably and prudently do there than, for example, in human factors, where they were in very good shape. There's an overall rating produced for the insurer. 30% probably going to have a higher insurance rate and more conditions on the insurance than something that's higher. Very rarely do you find an organization that gets over 70 or 80% here. Here's another example of metrics we produce. In this case, these are metrics associated with insurance policy elements. So the particulars of the insurer's different policies are included, and we provide ratings to the insurers based on that. Again, there's a rote opinion of just applying the standard of practice or applying some standard associated with the insurer, and an opinion piece. And this, in this case, red is high risk and green is low risk in terms of the insurer. So you can see green is a better bet than red. And in this particular case, this was the same enterprise that you saw before, and they're actually sort of fairly low risk, in the 30s and 40s in terms of their risk level for the insurance that they were looking to acquire. At the end of the assessment process, you get your final report. Remember, you get the full day discussion online. 10 days later, you get your final report with the as-is and reasonable and prudent future state after peer review and formalization into a document. 10 days later, we have a phone call to close it out. And the closeout call walks through, first of all, verifies that everything that was identified in the statement of work was in fact done. Talks about how you interpret your results. So, one of the keys here is that nobody knows everything. So in order to apply these results, it's reasonably necessary that you look things up. We have to look things up, right? And so will you as you apply it. So we're trying to make sure this doesn't become shelfware. Rather, it becomes something that you can apply in an ongoing basis to move forward in your protection program. We answer any questions you might have about the assessment. An example of a question we had in a recent assessment was about information sharing. And, part of the requirement in that particular case was that they identify how they share information and receive information about outside events. And so they were asking us about information sharing technology. And it turns out we did a recent briefing on information sharing and the technology behind it. So we pointed them to that video. They also asked us about, what would the qualifications be for a chief risk officer. So we look that up and provide that as part of that service. If you're getting ongoing support in the insurance option, we walk through that in the out briefing. Basically, you have a monthly session with the client decision-making team. You're required to update insurers on events and changes. Changes to your protective architecture have to be updated so that the rating, how much you have to pay for insurance relative to what the potential payouts are, the retentions. That's how much you have to lose before the insurance kicks in. And whether you're insurable depend on that. So if you make changes, they need to be notified. They have a right to know. And then there's also the events that take place. They have both a right to know about events that take place and an obligation to act to mitigate those events to the extent that they deem appropriate because it protects them from losing money and protects you from losing money. So that reporting of events is something that starts during this interim period and then continues throughout the period of insurance. Our process also supports moving forward from the as-is to the future state. When that happens, we update that in our documentation and provide you with your monthly update on the changes to your situation relative to the standard of practice. When you identify issues that require research, we have a team of folks that understand these issues. And to the extent it's already something we know about, we let you know. To the extent it's something that we don't know about, we engage in research in various aspects and issues and produce those reports, which we then provide to the people that have ongoing support. So you get updates, research report, and other supporting data. And about once a week, there's going to be an interaction. And so generally speaking, if you have something that's not, completely emergency, something you're, concerned about or want to understand, instead of sending off your workers to go do a bunch of research on it over the period of a few weeks, you just, put it on the agenda, tell us about it, and our ongoing support process will help you address it. And obviously, we greatly appreciate the business and say so. Just to give you a sense of what the ongoing support looks like, every month, we go through this list of things. We talk about what happened last month, the online meetings, any questions you identified, any issues you identified, and the details of what they were, and our responses to them, which should have been provided by the time of the next meeting. If they weren't, they'll be provided during that meeting. Updates to the standard of practice, as I mentioned earlier, there are several updates a month, and to the extent that they affect your enterprise, that's part of that information you get. And we update you on those relative to your as-is and reasonable and prudent future state. Also discuss world events relevant to your situation and identify other new material for your use. We then go into any questions you've identified for this month and things you want to know about. We update the standard of practice and provide you with the updated document, typically, again, at the end of the meeting. But if there's additional modification or edits required beyond what we can do during the meeting, those come soon thereafter. And then we set up next month's meeting and make sure that we have the time identified and so forth. So that's that process. And I just wanted to come back to here and identify a little bit more about how you use the standard of practice. This is what we do and what other people do. Again, once you get to there, you go to all.net and click on protection, and you get to here. The standard of practices, standards of practice are identified here. So we've just opened enterprise protection in a window, and it has all the elements associated with the enterprise. For each element, it has the issue and the question, a set of alternatives. Here are the alternatives. A decision. You can see the decision in this case is a conditional, fairly complex conditional, depending on situation. And then the basis for that decision. That is why it is you would make this choice. And that's just going to be true for each of them. I'm just going to walk through a couple of one. This one's fairly interesting. It's separation of duties. Fearless Security specifies and verifies we do not perform protective functions for other entities, and we don't manage protective functions for other entities. So the separation of duties we find to be sort of fundamental. It's similar to the separation of duties in purchasing and payments for an enterprise, and so we apply the same standards of practice to ourselves as we advise our clients to do. And also, of course, in this business, in the information protection business, the management and performance of protective functions is where the big money is. And we're in this niche market of specify and verify only. If you have any questions about this, we'd love to talk to you. Again, the standard of practice is open source, and we welcome you to look at it and review. If you have any process questions, please don't hesitate to contact us for those as well. Thank you.